What is the best exegetical guide available today? And in fact, what is an exegetical guide? In this video, we're going to take a look at exegetical guides and talk about some of the ones that are on the market today, coming up right after this. Hey there, I'm Darryl Burling from Master New Testament Greek, helping people just like you with the tools, habits, and systems to master the Greek of the New Testament. You don't have to be a scholar to be able to read the New Testament in biblical Greek. That's what I'm here to help you with. This video is sponsored by Logos Bible Software, and as we go through some of the things that we're going to look at and talk about in this video, I'm going to show you how this looks in Logos Bible Software. Thank you so much to Logos Bible Software for supporting this channel, and I encourage you to go to mntg.me/logos to get a copy of the Logos Foundation, the Essentials, 50% off, and get 5 free books with it as well. Let's get into it. Today we're going to look at exegetical guides, and we're going to try and work out what is the best exegetical guide on the market. But before we do that, let's ask the question, what is an exegetical guide? So here's a couple of examples of exegetical guides you can get on the market today. We have the Baylor series, and we have the Exegetical Guide to the Greek New Testament published by Broadman and Holman. Now, these are regarded as exegetical guides. They call themselves exegetical guides, but you might say, well, what's the difference between an exegetical guide and a commentary? Isn't this just a form of a commentary? Well, it kind of is, and it kind of isn't. There is a distinction, and these books actually make that distinction themselves. When it comes to hermeneutics, there are two key factors of hermeneutics that are important. The first one is sometimes referred to as meaning. And meaning seeks to ask the question, what does the text actually say? And what does it mean by what it says? Significance is the second part of the hermeneutical question, and significance tries to answer the question of why is this important? Now, this is where you get into things like theological discussions. This is where you're going to have your debates about one theological paradigm versus another. This is where the syntax often will make a difference one way or another, but that is significance. Now, an exegetical guide focuses on meaning, but not so much on significance. And typically an exegetical guide, because it's exegetical, it's focused on the Greek text primarily. Now, we're going to see in one of the examples I'm going to give you later on that that's not always the case, and certainly it's not exclusively the case. Each of these will also give some sort of English translation along the way. But these exegetical guides, they focus more on what the text is saying than on how you apply it or the theological implications of it. And for that reason, most of the time they will withhold or at least not get as involved in theological discussions as a commentary would. And so, as you can see, they tend to be smaller, shorter, and much more consumable. When it comes to a commentary will often start with a base translation, and often even an exegetical commentary will start with a base translation, and then they'll go back to the Greek to explain the translation, and then they'll give some more theological and exegetical explanation for why the conclusions they've come to are as they are. And so often commentaries will disagree with one another, not necessarily about the Greek text underneath, but about the significance or the meaning that they take away from that, the theological import or the application that we should take away from a particular text. That's what a commentary does. It's not so much what an exegetical guide does. And bear in mind that there are 3 types of commentaries. There are devotional commentaries, which focus primarily on personal application. There are expositional commentaries that focus more on how to preach a particular text. And then there are exegetical commentaries that don't go to that preaching level and do focus a little bit more on meaning and a little less sometimes on significance, but they do still try and go into that significance, and therefore one commentary will differ from another on what makes this text significant. So, in short, exegetical guides focus more on meaning. Commentaries go from meaning all the way into significance. Hey, if you're getting value from this video, could you hit the like button for me? That would be really helpful. Thanks so much. And so today what I want to do is give you a bit of a guide to exegetical guides. And it sounds a little bit meta, but so be it, right? And in this video, I want to talk about 4 exegetical guides that are on the market today and give you a brief overview of each of them and their strengths and weaknesses and pros and cons and so on and so forth. So let's get into the first one. The first exegetical guide that we're talking about in this video is actually not an exegetical guide. You could argue that this is actually, it doesn't really count. In fact, it doesn't even call itself an exegetical guide. Remember that an exegetical guide focuses more on meaning than on significance. Well, this exegetical guide focuses much more on the significance than on the meaning. And on top of that, it doesn't have the same focus on the original language that some of these other ones that I'm going to talk about do. But yet, it's not a commentary. And the ones I'm talking about here are the Exegetical Summaries published by SIL Publishing. Now, these are available on both Logos and on Accordance. I haven't actually seen them in print. They may be available in print as well. First of all, these have a kind of a semi-literal translation, that's what they call it anyway, that they supply with it. So it's not a formal translation, it's not from one of the main translations you're used to, but it's their own kind of translation. They call it semi-literal to try and help you to see the text. And then what they do is they actually go through a whole bunch of the commentaries and translations that are available and compare them and look at how one translation will translate a phrase compared to another one, and then make some sort of summary about those different translations and how they're taking the text to be. And then on top of that, where there's disagreements between commentaries, they're going to talk about those disagreements as well. And they're going to list out the different commentaries and the positions that they take. And this is why this is really more of an exegetical summary. It's providing a summary of the exegetical commentaries and the positions that they're taking on the text as you go through any given book. Now that means that these are actually, of all the exegetical guides we're talking about today, these are the least technical. These ones are much more accessible to somebody who doesn't know Greek. But the thing is with these, what they're trying to do with you is drive you back to the commentary. So you can, even if you don't have one commentary or another, you can see where the commentaries land. And then if you need to, you can go and get one particular volume from one commentary to try and understand the argument that they have there, or whatever it is. But these are really helpful to summarize the different positions that you get within a text. And they're not so technical, which makes them a little more appropriate for people who don't have any understanding of the Greek language itself. So that's the Exegetical Summaries. Now you can go and get a copy of this on Logos Bible Software from mntg.me/SIL Summaries. So go and get those there. They can get them as a set. I think you can buy them individually as well. But if you do know Greek, then you have other options that are available to you. And that's where I want to take you for the rest of this video. The first of these three that I want to take you to is the very well-known Baylor Handbook on the Greek New Testament. Now these are very small, very light volumes, very easy to pick up, and they're very succinct. So for each entry, each verse, really, they're going to break it down into different components, be it a word, be it a syntactical clause, be it just a syntactical construction even. They'll talk about actionsart and lexical meanings and all sorts of things like that. So it's really focused on doing the exegesis to help you see the meaning, and that's the hermeneutical meaning of the text, to understand what the text is actually saying. Now, what distinguishes this a little bit, apart from the brevity of the discussion in here, so sometimes you're going to get to a passage where there is a reasonable discussion on any given verse or any given word even sometimes, and they're not going to spend a lot of time going through commentaries. This is primarily focused on sort of giving you just that summary of a particular word or meaning or whatever. Now, it's going to give you references to things like BDAG and even commentaries on occasion, but that's not primarily the purpose here. The purpose here is to just give you very quickly a summary of a particular instance. So you might see a verb, and all it's going to give you is the passing and maybe the actionsart for that particular verb. Again, you can go then look in Wallace or wherever and see what does that actionsart mean? What is the author actually saying about the function of that verb in its context? Now, one of the things that sets this apart a little bit too is that there is a linguistic argument that they're making as you go through this series. For instance, they argue in the series introduction that there is no such thing as deponency, which means that all of the authors within this series are actually arguing against deponency and talking about the middle voice in Greek verbs as a middle voice, which is fantastic. But apart from this, there is still quite a lot of room for authors to have different views. So for instance, in Constantine Campbell's volume on Colossians, because he's written a lot on verbal aspect, he takes a slightly different view and actually uses his approach to verbal aspect inside the book of Colossians, unlike somebody like, say, Larkin, who hasn't quite done that kind of research throughout his career. So this is a great series, and I want to commend it to you. If you haven't already got this series, these are really helpful, and you really want to start trying to collect these if you can. Now, the distinctives here, they do include an English translation in here. It's not based on a translation as such. So normally it's the author's own translation, and it's going to be focused really on explaining the Greek text. So you're not here focusing on commentaries or any of those kind of things. It's really just giving you the basic meaning of the Greek text. And that means you get excellent discussions of the Greek text itself. It includes a discussion of linguistics, often even including things like discourse markers and things like that. And so this is ideal for people who are familiar with Greek and who can work and want to work directly with the Greek text itself. Now, unfortunately, not all of these are available on Logos Bible software, though many are, and I'm hoping that sometime soon the rest of them will also come to Logos. So that's the Baylor Handbook on the Greek text of the New Testament. Another series that started back in the 1980s, really, by Murray Harris, was then rebooted later in about 2008, 2009, and that was this series, which ended up getting picked up by B&H Academic. Now, this is the B&H Exegetical Guide to the Greek New Testament. This was the first volume in that series published. There is a number of volumes in the series now available, and they're available on Accordance, but not on Logos, and they can get them on Word Search, and you get them physical, obviously. So this series is a little different to the Baylor series. It's becoming quite popular. It has a couple of distinctives that set it apart and make it ideal for a certain type of audience, particularly over another. Let me explain. Now, this series is not quite as finely focused as the Baylor series. The Baylor series is very focused on meaning and really doesn't touch significance for the most part. This series, on the other hand, does dip its toes into the world of significance and theological meaning, and uses really a lot of discussion around different commentaries, how different commentaries come to different conclusions, not as much as the SIL Summaries, but still enough to make it different to the Baylor series. So this series also has a couple other things. First of all, in addition to giving you a translation in many cases, not every volume, I don't think this one actually has a translation into English, but most of them give you an English translation, but they also give you, and this is the really cool piece, is they give you a sentence diagram. So you get a block diagram of the structure of the text that you're working through, and then after you've got that block diagram, then after that you go into your discussion. And again, a little bit like the Baylor, it's discusses a word and what it means. It'll discuss a sentence or some tactical construction and how it's working. It'll talk about Actian Sart and so on, and it's generally going to give you a bit more information than what you get in the Baylor series. Now, at the end of each section in this, you get two other things which I think are really helpful. First of all, you'll get a bibliography of just the issues in that section, and this bibliography will include journal articles, it will include books, it will include entries from dictionaries and encyclopedias that are relevant to the discussion that's taken place in that particular section. And this is actually really helpful, because if you're studying a particular section and you're thinking, maybe it's a section on spiritual gifts, where are they getting their information on spiritual gifts? Well, there are bibliographical elements sitting at the bottom of that discussion for you to go and research later on. And that also gives you a clue about any bias, theological bias, particularly around significance, that this commentary, or this exegetical guide rather, may draw. The other thing it gives you immediately under that bibliography is actually a homiletical outline, which is essentially a preaching outline. So you get this text, you can look through the passage and understand how it's working, and then you've got basically a preaching outline that you can work from if you wanted to preach that text. Now, in my experience with this, that preaching outline is not so much an exegetical preaching outline, is really taking that whole section. And I would say that in many cases, if you're preaching a whole section like that, that's a lot to preach. Now, sometimes it will give you multiple sermon outlines, but as I looking through this, I noticed that the sermon outlines tend to be in fairly large sections of text, and you may want to break it down a little further. Now, you can do that, and some volumes give you a subdivision underneath each sermon outline, which means you can create a series out of it without too much trouble. But it just varies from one volume to another. But it's still a very helpful addition to this series, which makes it particularly helpful for preaching pastors who are working with the Greek text. This is where you want to go if you're in that situation. So in some ways, this combines a lot of what you get in the Baylor series with what you're going to get in the SIL Summaries, but it's going to give you some of those other helps like the bibliography and the homiletical outline that are going to be particularly helpful for pastors. So this is, again, because of that, it delves more into that significance realm of hermeneutics. So It's focused on meaning, but it also gives you more in the way of significance than what you'll get in the Baylor series. And therefore, it's going to give you the good technical discussion, but it's going to flow into application and theological significance on occasion, where Baylor largely doesn't touch that stuff. And I would say the last thing about this, please make it available on Logos. That would make this supreme. I would love to have this on Logos as well, because that's where I do my study, right? And maybe I'm the only one. I don't think so. The last guide in the collection that we're looking at today is this set, recently started to be published by Kriegel, which is called the Big Greek Idea series. Now, this is a series that's been started by Herb Bateman. Herb Bateman has about 20 years experience teaching biblical Greek. I think currently teaches at Southwestern. And he's been doing this for a long time. And in fact, there are volumes on 1 John that he's done previously that I wonder if this is kind of based in that. But this is very broad in its target audience. They argue in the beginning of this that it's for pastors, professors who are overworked, and students. Now, the thing is that as you work through this, I'm kind of mixed on exactly who this is for in a sense, because while you get that description at the beginning, you go to, say, 1 John chapter 4 in this volume, and in 1 John 4, you're going to have the word kai, right? And he's going to take that word kai, and you're going to see the definition of the word there. Then you're going to have a definition of the word kai. Now, if you're working through 1 John in Greek, and you get to chapter 4, you've already seen the word kai I don't know how many times. And the same goes with Eston, which is also on the same page in 1 John chapter 4. And for each of those entries, you get an explanation of what kai and what Eston means. If you've been working your way through the Greek, you know that, right? Why would you need to be told that again? What you would benefit from is a discussion of that in the context, and you get that, but why would you even get an explanation of the kai as a conjunction and it's used to connect terms and ideas? You don't need that, right? So I'm kind of torn in some ways. It appears to be more advanced in some ways. For instance, it uses a clause-by-clause outline, which does depend on you having a bit more of a grasp of Greek, but then that's really helpful as well. So it does a great job of connecting the ideas back to the text, and I think this is one of the strengths of this. But then why would you need to explain words like kai and Eston later on in the text? But that's probably a small nitpick, but just in terms of who this is for, it's hard to tell, really. So it does assume, they do make the point in the beginning to say that this assumes you've been through intermediate Greek. And again, why would you, if you've been through intermediate Greek, why would anybody need to tell you what Eston means? I mean, is this a no-brainer? You're going to learn that in the first few weeks of beginning Greek. So anyway, these are the things. So this is designed for people with a bit more experience with Greek, and that experience with Greek is going to be beneficial when you start looking clause by clause through this text. As you can see here, as you come into the text, each piece starts with basically you know what section you're going to work from. In this case, 1 John 1 verses 1 through 4. Before you get to this point, by the way, you got more of an introduction again to the text than probably what you had in the EGGNT and in the Baylor series as well. So there's more of a discussion here about discourse, types of clauses that are used, because this is clause by clause. This whole approach is clause by clause, not word by word, not syntactical construction at a time. It's clause by clause. So you can see here that you get to this passage and you've got this small heading here, the big Greek idea. Here's what John is trying to achieve in this section. Then underneath that, you've kind of got an overview of the structure, and then underneath that, you've got the outline. Now, the clausal outline here is really interesting. You've got both a Greek and an English clause by clause as you go through here. And so the Greek above it and the English below it allows you to kind of use this like an interlinear Bible, which kind of makes it a little different to both the EGGNT and the Baylor series as well. And then for each of these, you've got some pieces that are bold. These are the major structural clues. And then some of these are underlined as well, being keywords, and then other pieces are left just in normal regular text. And then as you carry on, then you've got your explanation of your syntax, and this goes through, you know, word by word, and some of these are going to give you some syntactical nuggets. Why is it this way? Why is this, you know, in this case, I think it's talking about the relative pronouns in 1 John chapter 1, and why are they in the neuter? So there's a syntactical nugget here, just giving you an explanation of it. Here's a lexical nugget about a particular word. So in each of these, as you go through, what you're going to find is that you're kind of getting that word by word, but also that syntactical outline that's going to be really helpful. So this flows more into significance than either the Baylor or the NT series does, which is one of the reasons, that's part of what accounts for its size, right? This is, as you can tell, a much larger volume than the Baylor series. And so that's part of what accounts for that, is that you're going to get more detail in here than you'd get in either the Baylor or the EGGNT series. So of all of the guides that we're talking about here, this is, really by far the most exhaustive. It focuses more on clauses than on syntax, which is what the EGG and the Baylor focus on. It crosses into the world of significance more than meaning, far more than the Baylor does, and somewhat more than the EGGNT does. But it's very helpful. It does say that it's for more advanced students, but then there are elements in this that make it appropriate for people who have had just beginning Greek or forgotten their Greek perhaps as well. The key thing here about this one is it's very good at connecting the syntax to the argument the author is trying to make. And that's what that's one of the things I like about this as well. Of each of these series, the Baylor series is probably the best known and the most popular. And now the key thing with these exegetical guides is they're ideal to be used in Bible software, and yet the availability is all over the map. The exegetical summaries, they're available on both Logos and on Accordance. Excellent. The Baylor series, some of them are available on Logos, none of them are available on Accordance, and they're all available in print. The EGGNT series are available in Accordance, but not on Logos, and you can get them in print, and you can get them on Word Search if you want to do that. And then finally, the big Greek Idea series are not available anywhere except on print. So it would be wonderful to have these volumes, probably of more so even than commentaries in some ways, available in Bible software, be it Logos or Accordance or whatever. It would be great to have these available. Really, please make them available. And so in terms of figuring out which one of these is the best, well, it's a hard choice. Honestly, I'm torn, but I think that I like the Baylor series, and the reason for this is it just focuses on the meaning, right? It's just focusing on the main text. Now, some of the volumes in this series as well are going to be stronger than other volumes. For instance, as much as I love Constantine Campbell's work, I don't think his volume is quite as helpful as the other volumes in this series, primarily because he's just pointing you back to the discussion about Actian Sat and aspect at the beginning of the volume all the time, rather than actually explaining it in the context. And I think that would be one of the things that I would have wanted to see change. But this is probably my favorite series. But what about you? What have you tried out of the series? What value have you got from them? And which one of these do you think has the best approach for what you're trying to achieve? Leave a note in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you there as well. And on top of that, if you're interested in getting a hold of any of these, I'll leave some links in the description below so you can go find copies for yourself wherever you're interested in getting a hold of those. If you found this video helpful and you've learned something today, hit the like button. That really helps me to know that this is helpful, and also helps YouTube to know this is a helpful video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notify bell. And until the next video, keep taking small, consistent steps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. We'll see you then.